First Contact's fatal mistake. The Zanari Empire had conquered 47 star systems without losing a single capital ship. Their crystalline vessels, grown rather than built, possessed technology that made most species surrender at first sight. They communicated through harmonic frequencies that could shatter glass from orbit, and their energy weapons converted matter directly into radiation. No species had lasted more than 3 standard rotations against them. Commander Thale stood in the command nexus of his flagship, the resonance of order, watching Earth rotate slowly on his displays. The blue-green world looked fragile, almost delicate, surrounded by primitive satellites and a handful of stations that barely qualified as military installations. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Vyse, harmonized her assessment through the crystalline walls. The humans possessed nuclear fission, basic fusion drives, and projectile weapons that belonged in a museum. Their entire space force consisted of 73 vessels, most of them retrofitted cargo haulers with welded-on weapon systems. The conquest protocol was simple and had worked perfectly for 2 centuries. Arrive in overwhelming force, demonstrate technological superiority, offer terms of surrender that allowed the species to live as vassals, and integrate their resources into the empire. Most species chose survival over extinction. The few who resisted were made examples of, their world stripped bare and their population scattered as laborers across Zanari colonies. Thale transmitted the standard ultimatum on all human frequencies. The message was clear. Submit to Zanari rule within 1 rotation, maintain your culture as subjects of the Empire, and live. Resist and face complete annihilation. The humans had developed enough to receive and understand the transmission. Their primitive computers could decode Zanari mathematical concepts. They would comprehend the futility of resistance. The response came not from Earth's military command, but from something called the United Nations. A human female, Secretary General Chen Wei, appeared on the communication display. She spoke calmly without the fear Thale expected. Her words were translated through the ship's systems, but something in her tone transcended language barriers. She thanked the Zanari for their offer and requested 3 days to convene Earth's governments for a formal response. She spoke of procedures, protocols, and the need for unanimous consent from something called the Security Council. This resonated confusion through the command nexus. No species had ever requested time to consider surrender. They either submitted immediately or fired their weapons in desperate defiance. Thale considered this. The humans were stalling, perhaps evacuating their leadership or preparing some futile defense. It mattered little. 3 days would change nothing. He approved the request, curious to see what these primitives might attempt. During those 3 days, human behavior became even more peculiar. They didn't mobilize their military forces or attempt to evacuate their cities. Instead, they held meetings. Endless meetings broadcast on their global networks. Scientists discussed Zanari technology on educational channels. Religious leaders debated the theological implications of alien contact. Children drew pictures of the crystalline ships that were shared across their primitive internet. It was as if the entire species was having a conversation with itself. The Zanari monitored it all, finding the human response both fascinating and pathetic. These creatures faced extinction, yet they wasted time on discussions and debates. Some humans even suggested welcoming the Zanari, arguing that advanced technology and governance might benefit Earth. Others spoke of resistance, but their military leaders remained notably silent. No preparations were visible. No weapons were charged. Earth's defenders maintained their standard orbital patterns. Then came the incident that changed everything. A Zanari scout craft investigating mineral deposits in the asteroid belt encountered a human mining vessel called the Persistence. The mining ship, little more than a hollowed-out asteroid with engines attached, should have fled or surrendered. Instead, its captain, a man named Pavel Volkov, did something unprecedented. He invited the Zanari aboard for what he called coffee. The scout team, confident in their superiority, accepted. They found themselves in a cramped, dirty facility that reeked of sweat and machine oil. 37 human miners, men and women who spent years in space breaking rocks for precious metals, greeted them with curiosity rather than fear. Volkov himself, a giant of a man with scarred hands and a beard full of metal shavings, offered them a black liquid that the translator called coffee and asked about their families. The Zanari scouts reported this bizarre encounter to Thale, who found it amusing. These humans were so primitive they didn't understand their danger. He ordered the scouts to document everything for the Empire's anthropological records. Dead species told no stories, but their final moments could be instructive for future conquests. The scouts spent 6 hours with the human miners, recording their crude technology and simple social structures. The miners showed them everything. The life support systems held together with adhesive tape and hope. The nuclear reactor that leaked just enough radiation to require everyone to take medicine daily. The hydroponic gardens where they grew food that looked barely edible. The miners seemed proud of their ramshackle operation, explaining how they'd survived 15 years in space with minimal support from Earth. They talked about their families, showed pictures of children, and shared stories of near disasters that became legendary tales told in the mess hall. Volkov asked the scouts about Zanari mining techniques. When they explained how the Empire used automated systems that could harvest an entire asteroid in days, the human captain laughed. He actually laughed, a sound that the Zanari found disturbing. He said something that the translator struggled with, something about the difference between taking and earning. The scouts didn't understand, but they recorded it all. As the scouts prepared to leave, Volkov shook their leader's appendage, a gesture the computer identified as a greeting or farewell ritual. He looked directly at the Zanari scout leader and said words that would echo through the Empire's history. The translator processed them as, "Thanks for the visit. If your bosses decide to attack Earth, tell them Pavel Volkov said they can go fuck themselves." The scouts left, confused by the interaction. They reported to Thale that the humans seemed unaware of their impending doom. The commander dismissed it as the ignorance of a dying species. He had seen it before. Primitive peoples who couldn't comprehend the power arrayed against them. The 3 days were nearly over. Soon, humanity would submit or be destroyed. Secretary General Chen Wei delivered Earth's response exactly on schedule. She stood at a podium in New York, flanked by representatives from every nation on Earth. Behind her hung a new flag, hastily designed but somehow perfect. It showed Earth surrounded by stars, with a single word beneath it: defiance. Her message was brief and delivered in multiple languages, though she spoke primarily in English. Humanity had considered the Zanari offer carefully. They understood the consequences of resistance. They appreciated the opportunity to surrender. After extensive deliberation, the United Peoples of Earth had reached a consensus. The answer was no. They all waited for more, for conditions or negotiations, but Chen Wei simply stood there, silent and resolute. The transmission ended. Around Earth, those 73 primitive ships began to move. They didn't form battle lines or defensive positions. They scattered seemingly at random, some heading for the asteroid belt, others diving toward Earth's atmosphere, a few accelerating toward Mars. It looked like panic, but something about it felt wrong. The Zanari fleet, 500 vessels strong, began its advance. Thale would make an example of Earth. The first barrage would eliminate their orbital infrastructure. The second would target major cities. By the end of the day, humanity would either beg for mercy or cease to exist. The crystalline ships charged their primary weapons, reality-warping beams that could turn matter into its component atoms. The first sign that something was different came from the scout ship still monitoring the asteroid belt. The Persistence, Pavel Volkov's mining vessel, had changed course. It was accelerating directly toward the Zanari scout ship at maximum burn. The scouts reported this, confused. The mining vessel had no weapons. It was a collision course, but their shields could easily withstand impact from such a primitive craft. They were wrong. The Persistence didn't try to ram them. At the last moment, it detonated its entire mining payload. 17 fusion bombs designed to crack asteroids exploded simultaneously. The scout ship's shields, configured to stop energy weapons and kinetic impacts, couldn't handle the raw nuclear fury. The crystalline vessel shattered like glass hit by a sledgehammer. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out. Every human ship, whether military or civilian, had been transformed into a weapon. Cargo haulers carried nuclear mines. Passenger liners had been stuffed with radioactive waste and conventional explosives. Even tiny maintenance pods had been rigged to explode. The humans weren't trying to win battles. They were turning themselves into ammunition. A cruise ship called the Celestial Dream, which should have been evacuating civilians, broadcast a message before ramming into a Zanari destroyer. The captain, an elderly woman named Sarah Mitchell, spoke calmly as her ship accelerated toward certain death. She said she had lived through 3 wars on Earth and sworn never to see another. If destroying herself meant Earth's children might know peace, it was a small price to pay. The impact and subsequent explosion took 3 Zanari vessels with it. Thale watched his tactical display in disbelief. The humans were committing suicide on a massive scale, but it wasn't random or panicked. It was coordinated. Every ship knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. They targeted shield generators, communication arrays, and engine systems with precision that suggested deep preparation. This hadn't been decided in 3 days. The humans had been preparing for this moment long before the Zanari arrived. From Earth itself came a new development. Mass drivers, hidden in mountain ranges and disguised as research facilities, began firing. They weren't shooting advanced projectiles or energy beams. They were launching garbage, literally. Compressed cubes of human waste, obsolete electronics, and radioactive material accelerated to 20% of light speed. The Zanari shields could stop them, but each impact drained power reserves. And there were thousands of them. Then came the children's toys. Thale couldn't believe the sensor readings. Earth was launching toys into space. Dolls, model airplanes, toy soldiers, all embedded with antimatter charges. Where had primitives acquired antimatter? The answer came from intercepted human communications. They had been producing it for 40 years, tiny amounts at massive cost, hiding the program as theoretical research. Every gram they had produced was now weaponized and heading for his fleet. Sub-Commander Viss reported something else. The human internet, which they had monitored, had changed. Every screen on Earth now showed the same thing, a countdown timer and a single message. Give us liberty or give us death. Historical records indicated this was a quote from something called the American Revolution. The Zanari computers couldn't calculate the significance, but Thale was beginning to understand. The humans weren't trying to survive. They were trying to make conquest impossible. When predators become prey, the Battle of Earth had been raging for 17 hours when Commander Thale realized the true scope of humanity's preparation. His fleet had lost 43 ships, mostly to suicide attacks and improvised weapons. The losses were acceptable, even expected when facing a species that chose death over surrender. What troubled him was the pattern emerging from the chaos. The humans weren't just dying bravely, they were dying strategically. Every sacrifice ship had herded Zanari vessels into specific positions. Every nuclear detonation had forced course corrections that seemed random but weren't. The humans were using their own deaths as a tactical element, treating their lives as currency to purchase positioning. Thale had conquered civilizations that possessed antimatter weapons and quantum computers, but none had ever weaponized martyrdom with such precision. The revelation came from an unlikely source. A human child, no more than 12 years old, had somehow hacked into Zanari communication frequencies. The face that appeared on every screen in the fleet belonged to a girl who identified herself as Ming from Singapore. She spoke perfect Zanari, which should have been impossible. Their language required specific harmonic frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't produce. Yet there she was, speaking as clearly as any native. She explained that humanity had been preparing for this day for 70 years. Not specifically for the Zanari, but for the inevitable moment when Earth would face a technologically superior force. Every nation had contributed to secret programs. Every scientist had added pieces to a vast puzzle. Children like Ming had been trained from birth to understand alien technologies, studying every signal from space, every mathematical possibility of non-human intelligence. The moon, Ming explained with a child's enthusiasm, wasn't just Earth's satellite. It had been hollowed out over decades, turned into humanity's greatest weapon. She called it Project Damocles after something from their mythology. The entire lunar core had been replaced with a fusion bomb the size of a city. If Earth fell, the moon would be detonated, sending billions of tons of debris into Earth's orbit at relativistic speeds. The planet would be uninhabitable for millennia, but so would the space around it. No one could claim Earth if Earth ceased to exist as a viable world. Thale ordered immediate strikes on the moon, but it was too late. Human forces had activated something called the Moscow Protocol. Every nuclear weapon on Earth, over 15,000 devices, had been synchronized to a single trigger. Not to launch at the Zanari, but to detonate in place. The radiation would kill most life on Earth. but it would also create an electromagnetic pulse that would cripple any technology in the solar system for years. The humans had turned their entire world into a bomb, and they were holding the detonator with steady hands. Sub-Commander Weiss suggested negotiation, but the humans weren't interested in talking anymore. Their actions spoke louder than any words. A group of modified cargo vessels, calling themselves the Ghost Fleet, emerged from behind Jupiter's radiation shadow. They had been hiding there for months, shields replaced with stealth systems, weapons charged with stolen Zanari energy signatures. The first the Empire knew of their presence was when 12 cruisers exploded from internal detonations. The Ghost Fleet's commander, Admiral Yuki Tanaka, broadcast a single message before her ships engaged. "You thought you were the predators. Welcome to our hunting ground." Her tactics were unlike anything in Zanari military doctrine. She used gravity wells as weapons, luring Empire ships into orbital mechanics that required massive energy to escape. She deployed clouds of metallic chaff that confused sensors while hiding nuclear mines. She even used Jupiter's magnetosphere as a weapon, channeling its radiation into focused beams that bypassed Zanari shields. On Earth, the resistance took an even more disturbing turn. Humans began broadcasting music into space. Not communications or propaganda, but music. Symphonies, rock concerts, children's lullabies, and ancient chants from every culture. The Zanari systems tried to analyze it for hidden codes or weapons, but found nothing. It was just music, played at volumes that could be heard on every Empire ship. The psychological effect was profound. It reminded every Zanari soldier that they were trying to destroy a species that created beauty while facing extinction. The mining vessel Persistence, which had started the violent resistance, became a legend that spread through human communications. Pavel Volkov's sacrifice inspired others. Workers on Luna Station vented their entire atmosphere to propel the station into a collision course with a Zanari battleship. A tourist shuttle full of newlyweds chose to honeymoon in the heart of the enemy fleet, detonating their fuel reserves while broadcasting their wedding vows. An agricultural transport seeded with bioweapons that wouldn't kill, but would make any Zanari who breathed them allergic to their own ship's atmosphere. Creativity became humanity's greatest weapon. They fought with improvisation and insanity, using tactics that no military computer could predict because they made no logical sense. A children's hospital ship claimed to surrender, then released thousands of toy drones that attached to Zanari hulls, and played human nursery rhymes at volumes that disrupted crystalline harmonics. A waste management vessel fired frozen sewage projectiles that, while causing no real damage, forced Zanari crews to spend hours cleaning their sensors. The turning point came from Mars, humanity's first colony world. The red planet had seemed defenseless, home to barely 50,000 scientists and their families. Thala had dismissed it as insignificant. He was wrong. Mars had been humanity's testing ground for every desperate weapon they couldn't safely test on Earth. The colonists had turned the entire planet into a laboratory for impossible warfare. When the Zanari assault force approached Mars, they triggered something called the Tesla Array. Every solar panel on Mars, millions of them, had been secretly linked into a massive capacitor. The colonists had been storing solar energy for 20 years, accepting power shortages and rationing to feed this hidden system. In a single discharge that lit up the solar system, they released the equivalent of a small star's output directly into the Zanari fleet. The Empire lost 70 ships in 3 seconds. The Mars colonists lost their entire power grid and would likely freeze to death within days. But their message was clear. Humanity would make victory so costly that even winning would be losing. Commander Thale faced a choice no Zanari leader had confronted before. He could continue the assault and likely succeed in destroying Earth, but at what cost? His fleet was down to 300 ships. The humans showed no signs of surrendering. Their children were volunteering for suicide missions. Their elderly were turning medical stations into weapons. Even their pets had been rigged with explosives. Though that program had apparently been vetoed by something called the Geneva Convention, which the humans were selectively ignoring. The moment of decision came when Thala received a priority transmission from the Empire's core worlds. 3 other species previously conquered and pacified had begun rebellions. They had been inspired by humanity's resistance, seeing proof that the Zanari could be fought, could be hurt, could be made to bleed. The Empire needed his fleet elsewhere, but he couldn't leave Earth unconquered. It would be a symbol of Zanari weakness. Secretary General Chen Wei contacted him directly, not with demands but with an offer. Humanity proposed something unprecedented in Zanari history, a draw. Earth would not surrender, but neither would they pursue the retreating Zanari fleet. They would share their technologies, the innovations born from desperation, in exchange for a treaty that recognized Earth's sovereignty. The humans offered to become allies, not subjects, partners in space rather than vassals. It was absurd. The Zanari didn't make alliances with inferior species, yet as Thale looked at his tactical display, at the hundreds of human ships still preparing to die, at the moon bomb that could deny everyone victory, at the planet willing to burn itself rather than kneel, he realized something. The humans weren't inferior. They were insane, chaotic, and primitive. But they were not inferior. Admiral Tanaka's Ghost Fleet had destroyed another 20 Zanari ships while Thale deliberated. The Mars colonists had launched themselves in individual spacesuits with mining charges, becoming human missiles. Earth's children were broadcasting messages to Zanari crews, asking them if their empire was worth dying for, if conquest was worth the extinction of beauty and music, and the strange drink called coffee that Pavel Volkov had shared. Thale made his decision. He ordered the fleet to withdraw to safe distance and opened negotiations, not for humanity's surrender, but for something the Empire had never considered before, a treaty between equals. The humans had earned it through blood and madness, through sacrifice and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They had looked at the stars and decided that death was preferable to chains, and in doing so had won something greater than survival. As the negotiations began, punctuated by the continued playing of human music across all frequencies, Sub-Commander Viss asked Thale a question that would haunt the Empire for generations. What kind of species chooses extinction over servitude and calls it victory? Thale watched Earth slowly rotating on his display, blue and green and impossibly defiant, and gave the only answer that made sense. The kind of species you don't want as enemies. The kind you want as friends. The Treaty of Sol, signed 3 days later as Earth's moon bomb remained armed and ready, marked the first time in Zanari history that they retreated from a world they could have conquered. It also marked the beginning of something new in the galaxy. Other species took note. The humans had proven that technology and numbers weren't everything, that sometimes the will to resist mattered more than the means to resist. In the years that followed, humanity's reputation spread throughout the galaxy. They became known not as a conquered species that had won its freedom, but as the species that had looked at impossible odds and chosen to make those odds irrelevant. They were the ones who had weaponized everything from garbage to music, who had turned their children into hackers and their elderly into martyrs, who had faced the most powerful empire in known space and told them, in the words of Pavel Volkov, that they could go fuck themselves. The Zanari Empire never attacked Earth again, not because they couldn't win, but because they had learned what victory against humanity would cost. The price was too high, paid not just in ships and soldiers but in the knowledge that some species would rather cease to exist than surrender their freedom. And perhaps more importantly, they had learned that such species, once befriended rather than conquered, made the most valuable allies in the universe. Earth stood free, scarred but unbroken, a small blue world that had changed the galaxy's understanding of strength. The real power wasn't in advanced technology or massive fleets. It was in the willingness to stand up, look at overwhelming force, and say no. It was in the courage to die on your feet, rather than live on your knees. It was in the madness to fight when fighting was impossible, and win by refusing to lose. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, the knowledge that sometimes, the smallest dog in the fight could have the biggest bite, especially when that dog was protecting its home.